So now it's my very great pleasure to bring to the stage our first keynote speaker, Professor Ioan Fazey. Ioan is the Director of Environmental Change and Human Resilience at the University of Dundee. He's an interdisciplinary researcher, and his current research focuses on resilience, adaptation, and what it means to achieve equitable and sustainable societal transformations, and the practice that help to facilitate such changes. So, thank you.
Great, good morning. Good morning. Great, thank you. Thanks, Dave, for the introduction. This is a great beginning of a conference, isn't it? Don't you think? So many people here. Lovely band last night. Great start. Yes, you can clap if you like. That's good. That's great. Thank you. It's also a really interesting time because it's also the beginning of the end of the world as we know it. Everything is changing. Everything around us is changing. And maybe you feel it. Sometimes I feel like I've got to run faster to stand still. Sometimes I'm feeling like I'm not running fast enough. And all the change around us is happening, whether it's shifts in global economic power, whether it's changes in digital technologies, whether it's climate change and the impacts that are coming from that. It's all changing. And that's really worth holding in your mind when you think about what does that mean for us? What does that mean for a conference? What does it mean for researchers and the practitioners that are here as well? So that's what I want to talk about, is what is our role? What does it mean to be a knowledge producer? What does it mean to be these things and doing these things in this kind of world? What I'm going to start off with, is that the slide thing? Do I just press the green button? It says go. Right, okay. So, can I go back again? Yep, I can go back. Okay, so we've got knowledge in a changing world, in a transforming world. Many of you will have seen these slides before. This is nothing new. But basically it says that there are a whole range of indicators that are changing in the world around us, whether it be social economic trends, whether it be Earth system trends. There's been exponential growth in all sorts of things over many, many years, but mostly since the 1950s. So massive change that is happening around us and that we're faced with. And it's a bit like that. My sense and the feeling of it is it's a bit like that sort of distant thunder that's rolling in the background that's coming towards us. Something is happening. There's an anticipation there. We're waiting for something to happen. It's sort of not happening fast enough, yet it's happening all the time. And transformations are inevitable. And this is the end of the world as we know it. Either we're going to have transformations through massive impacts from things like climate change, or we're going to get transformations through the active, proactive processes that help us navigate through that period of change as well. So the transformations in themselves are inevitable. Things will change, things are changing. I just want to give one example of a place where some of these changes are having a huge impact. And this is Louisiana. So you can see the Gulf of Mexico there. And the little lights that are coming out into the Gulf of Mexico, that's the delta of the Mississippi, which flows through Louisiana. And in Louisiana, there are some major challenges that they're facing. So over the next 50 years, they're going to lose all of that red stuff. It's about 400,000 people. 400,000 people, and if you look at where the lake bit is at the top, on the top right-hand side, just below that is New Orleans. So in that scenario, in a high climate change scenario, they're going to lose all of those things, and New Orleans effectively becomes an island in amongst all of those sorts of, all of that material. And you can see the Mississippi flowing down through there, out into the Gulf of Mexico. It's huge change, but what's really important is that change is already happening. There are already communities that are being moved. In 10 years, there'll be more communities that are being moved. It's happening now. It's already started. So this is a major challenge in a whole region of the southern US. It extends into Florida and places like that as well. So why is that occurring? Well, it's a range of complex factors. This is a fantastic map by a guy called Robert Stooks. And you see that pink stuff? That's the Mississippi catchment. It's about 40% of the US catchment. Flows all the way down into the Mississippi. And as it flows down, it takes all this sediment. So over the last 10,000 years or so, Louisiana's built from the sediment of the Mississippi. And after the Great Flood in 1927, what happened was that they built tons and tons of levees, and they constrained the flow of the river. So they constrained the flow of the river that was no longer getting the recharge from the sediment from the Mississippi River, and so the land starts to dry out, it subsides, and with all sorts of other activities as well, like oil exploration and so on, then you get this land loss. And that's really what's happening. It's a combination of human factors. You add some climate change into that, sea level rise, and you get this what's called relative sea level rise happening in there. And the human development happened along these distributaries as the rivers came out. Ironically, the communities are on the riverbanks, which is actually the highest point of land, because that's where the sediment forms. And so these changes are phenomenal, and then you get these sort of situations which makes them highly vulnerable to hurricanes. And this is a real challenge, and it's a new challenge. It's not really something that we've dealt with before, and we don't know how to deal with it. So I've been working through the Center of Planning and Excellence in Louisiana with the governor's office and the governor and their senior staff, simply just asking the question, crikey, what do we do about this? How do we deal with this? What does it mean to govern in a situation like this when we've got silos of different things and different departments? Education departments saying, oh, we're going to build another school here. Somebody's saying, yeah, but that's not going to be there in 15 years. Right? So this is happening now, and it's affecting communities all around that region. And of course, that's not just Louisiana, that's Bangladesh, that's wherever you think about, Florida, so on and so on. And that's just one issue. And that doesn't really, it's climate change is part of it, but it's not a big part of it in that case. And essentially what this really is about is it's about three kinds of emergencies that we're facing. We're facing real emergency, where there's immediate challenges that are affecting people in all sorts of ways, livelihoods and so on and so on. There's the conceptual emergency. How do we govern in that situation? What do we do about that? And then there's the existential emergency. What does it even mean? What are we trying to achieve here? The interesting thing about Louisiana is that most of the work in the coastal region is being funded by the money that came out of the reparations money from the Deep Horizon incident that the oil industry is funding. So it's the money from the damage from the Deep Horizon oil spill that is funding the adaptation and restoration work in the Louisiana coast. Like, how do you get your head around that? This is about asking questions about, what is right in these kind of circumstances. So this creates a huge bunch of change, and it leaves us sort of feeling a bit like this. And then we start to realize things like this are happening, right? This is a poster that was in a bookshop in Glasgow somewhere that a colleague of mine found. But it's real, right? We're in it. We're in it already. It's real. It's happening. And then this raises questions about, well, what should we do in this as knowledge producers or whatever we want to call ourselves? Engaging that. What does it mean to understand and know and work and act in that kind of world? And to answer that question is challenging. But we have to go back and think about, well, where has science come from? Where has research come from? I use the term science very generally. I mean most of the stuff that we do. It's created a huge number of benefits. We wouldn't be in this room without the technological advances that we've created. We wouldn't be in this room without that. And we wouldn't be here today without the transport and the technological things. It is part of society. But what we often forget is to stand back and go, well, what has it also created? And it's also created many of the challenges that we're facing. So intentional destruction. Science and technology has been used to kill people, literally, to develop a capacity to kill people. It's about appropriation of ownership. How we develop GM crops that tied poor farmers in rural areas into certain ways of doing things that they can't get out of for certain different ways. But also you get these unintentional, highly interconnected outcomes that are the product of the systems that we've created in terms of the way our societies have developed. So climate change, obesity, think about the patterns of mobility, diet, so on. These are all sort of symptoms and properties of what's emerging from what we've created. And they come from science, technology, and the way that integrates with society. I'm not saying science is bad necessarily. It's produced all sorts of amazing things. But it's also created a whole range of challenges that we're dealing with. And effectively what's happened is that things have been unleashed we cannot control or fully understand. We can't address the problems throwing the same kinds of thinking at them that created them. And that reminds me of a story. Right, I'm going to play you some music. I want to see anybody who recognizes this music. and who might be able to think about what story I might be thinking of as we play this music. Are we ready for the music? Yeah, go for it. Yep. So listen to this music. It's lovely music. I used to dance to this when I was a kid. Do you know this one? Hands up if you know it. You might not know the name. Yeah, we know it. Okay. Does anybody know the name of the music? Not quite. Somebody said Fazey. I'm going to come to that in a minute. What about the actual name of the music? Sorcerer's Apprentice. Exactly. L'apprenti sorcière. Anybody know the music? The writer of the music? Nobody. Ducat. Oh yeah, we got some in the back. Yeah, well, Paul Ducat, yeah, he was 1890, something like that. So it's a song called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It was used in the Fantasia film. Anybody know the Fantasia film? Yeah. That was the Disney film, 1940s. Disney's third sort of film of comic sort of film that he did. And there's that amazing story with Mickey Mouse, and he's the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Okay, got enough music, right. Cut the music, good. So The Sorcerer's Apprentice it's a really interesting story. And the story is basically, if you don't know it, is there's this sorcerer. I'm going to call it a wizard from now on. You've got a wizard in a castle, and he's got an apprentice, little student, maybe a PhD student, something like that. And the PhD student, sort of apprentice, is asked to look after the castle when he goes away. And the sorcerer says, well, I also want you to clean the whole of the castle, right? The whole of the castle while I'm away. And the apprentice goes, crikey, that's going to be a challenge, but I'll give it a go. And he starts scrubbing the walls and things like that, and he realizes it's just too much like hard work. So he goes and finds the spell that the wizard would have used perhaps himself, and he reads out the spell, and he has just enough knowledge to get the spell going, and he gets the buckets and the mops and the brushes and things doing all the work for him. But then he realizes he can't control it. It gets faster and faster and faster, and he has no control over this thing. And it gets completely out of hand. And he panics, and he chops up one of the brooms or the mops. It splinters into lots of pieces. They all become new brooms, and it just goes on and on and on. He keeps throwing the same stuff at it, and it doesn't work. And eventually, the wizard comes back. And the wizard comes back and magics it all away. And it comes from Goethe's original poem. And here's a couple of the verses of the poem. For the magic charm undoing, what I did I have forgotten. Be a broom, be not renewing, now your efforts spell begotten. Still his work abhorrent does the wretch resume. Where I look a torrent threatens me with doom. You hells miscreate abortion, is this house doomed to perdition? Signs I see in every portion of impending demolition. Servant cursed and senseless, do obey my will. Be a broom defenseless, be a stick, stand still. Right? He's trying to control it, and he's still trying to do the same stuff to keep it going. And that's kind of what we're facing at the moment in the world. We've all this stuff that's going on, and we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to stop it. And it's really difficult. And that's the story, but in this story, in the story we're in, it's different. And as Tony Hodgson, one of my colleagues and mentors, tells me that it's like we've got this wizard's apprentice, and the wizard is there in that story. But in our story, the wizard isn't there. The wizard doesn't come back. There is no magic thing to get rid of it, right? And so we're in this unleashed sort of situation where there's all this stuff going on, but we can't control it. But we aren't wizards necessarily, and we can't stop that. So what does that mean then? Okay, so if we're all apprentices and there are no wizards, what does that mean in terms of how we act in that world, in the world that we're in a world of transformation? The first thing is, we need to accept that we're all apprentices. Right? We're not experts in this world that we're in now, in this world of change. And that requires humility, and it requires acceptance that approaches and thinking that we currently have won't address the problems they've also created. So that's the first part. We have to acknowledge we're apprentices in complex systems. The second is that we really need to start drawing on, and I know many of you are already doing that, but draw on much more diverse forms of knowledge. We then tend to produce very particular forms of knowledge in research. And that's really, really key. If you think of the apprentice had just enough knowledge to read from the spell book and then to wave the magic wand. He had a bit of know-how knowledge to do that, but he didn't have the rest of the knowledge that he needed in order to make that work. And if you think about it, you take any of the large global programs, reports that come out, they're all saying, we've got this big problem. And then they say, well, we need transformation. Crikey, that's a big term and a big statement, right? We need transformation, or we need major change, or something like that. And then you've got the policy professionals going, yeah, we know there's a problem. What do we do about it? That's what I want to know. And that demand for the how-to knowledge is rapidly growing. Rapidly growing. But we don't tend to have that so much in universities. And there's often this misconception that there's a gap between research and practice. There is no gap, it's a misconception. It's that there are different kinds of knowledge that are needed for that, right? You've got the epistemic knowledge, the spell book, the papers, the PowerPoint presentations. But you also need the techne, what Aristotle called the techne, the know-how knowledge. So if you imagine driving a car, that's the embodied knowledge that's very difficult to explain. You can show to somebody, but you can't necessarily explain it. Hard to make it explicit. And you've got the phronesis kinds of knowledge wisdom. I'll come back to that in a minute. And in the case of the Wizard's Apprentice, as I said, they had the ability to read the epistemic knowledge to get the thing going, but they didn't have the know-how to keep working with it. And we need much more of that. And that's a real problem for many researchers because it violates. If you want to get to that knowledge, you have to learn from doing. You have to get your hands dirty, get things messy, get involved in that messy real world of practice. And that's a real challenge for many researchers because it violates the traditional assumption in a lot of science and research that we should be looking from the outside into something, that we shouldn't get involved. And you see that manifesting in all sorts of different ways. But we have to get involved if we want to get involved in the how-to questions. We're going to have to do more of that in some form. The third bit then that I wanted to talk about was we also need to develop wisdom, not just knowledge itself. And that's really key. If you think about the apprentice was quite selfish, really. He was really just thinking about himself. He didn't really think that maybe he needed to spend a bit of time developing that depth of knowledge, that sense of feeling. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Questioning it. And maybe that's what the wizard was asking him to do. Maybe the wizard, actually, interestingly, there are different ends to the story because sometimes the wizard's really angry, sometimes he's just amused. Maybe he set that up as a learning lesson, right? Maybe that was the whole point of it. We don't know. But the wisdom is really important in this as well. And this is coming out in all sorts of areas of academic work. So Phil Hanlon, a public health researcher, says, yeah, we need science, we need research, that's incredibly important, but we need to find a better way of integrating that with understanding of what is good and right and what is beautiful, and combining those things. Andreas Clay talks about lack of accountability of science to society, that there's something not quite right in terms of how we act. And Nicholas Maxwell very aptly highlights that we need to develop not just knowledge about the biophysical and social world, which we're incredibly good at. We're brilliant at churning that wheel. We've produced tons and tons of this stuff. And yet, over the last 300 years, have we really learned how to act in the world? I don't know. And what he talks about very much is this notion that we need to shift direction towards developing wisdom. And of course, wisdom includes knowledge, but it also includes something else as well. And this is my favorite one when I think about it, about unleashing creativity and possibility for magic. It's about going back to that childlike sense of creativity where we haven't learned what we think we've already learned that we think is important, but we've still got space to be thinking differently. And that childlike quality. I've got a friend back in Scotland, in Dundee, and I know a couple of people here know her. And she's a very interesting character. She's technically a clinical hypnotherapist, right? But the locals call her the local witch. So she knows stuff, very affectionately, but she knows stuff in ways that I don't understand. And she once said that she had a group of medical students. And the medical students came to her and said, look, we've been tasked with trying to create a game for kids. And the game for kids we've got to do as part of our medical training. And they asked her to take them back to their childhood, hypnotize them and go back to their childhood so they could remember what it was like to be kids again, right? So they could remember that and be that creativity and have that openness and that space to do it. So I think it's time that we played kids as well, right? So this is something else we did I used to do some work in the Solomon Islands, and we used to play lots of games because they love smiling and having games, and that's the best way of getting people involved. And this is actually what these guys are pretending to be as wizards. Right, so we're going to play a game, and the game, I'm just going to check how much time I've got left first to make sure we're still on track. Yep, plenty of time, great, we can play a game. So do you know the paper, maybe some of you know the paper, scissors, stones game? You know your paper, scissors, stones? We're going to do that version, but we're going to act out 3 different things. So you get to choose to be one of the 3 things. So I need everybody to stand up. If you can't stand up for whatever reason, don't worry. You can do it sitting down as well. But everybody stands up. I've never done this before. I've done it with 200 people. I've never done it with 500 people. So I'm sorry if you can't see me. Maybe I need to go up here. So what we have to do is we have to practice 3 things. So we're going to be giants, fairies, and wizards, right? And you can't escape this participation. There's no excuse for this one. So we're going to practice them. So the giant goes, "Roar," like that, okay? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, I want to see lots of giants. Go, "Roar." Oh, come on, guys. Right, let's try that again. 1, 2, 3, "Roar." That's much better, okay. Right, and the next one, I quite like this one. This is the fairy. The fairy goes, like this. 1 leg, if you can do 1 leg. Right, so 1 leg, okay. Right, let's try that again, come on. Great, okay. And the next one, this is my favorite, it's the wizard. Right, no, I know it's got to be a bit lower. That's it, yeah, hands out. Go for it, 1, 2, 3. Much better, okay. So, now you've got to find a partner, or somebody to partner off against, and this is great if you don't know them. And you, in your head, have to choose which one you're going to be. Right, you don't tell them. You choose which one you're going to be, and then you're going to stand off at them, and after 3, you're going to face off at them, okay? But what you have to remember, okay, so you have to listen really carefully. Listen carefully. This is the order how it goes, right? So a giant beats a wizard. Okay, you got that? Giant beats wizard. Wizard beats fairy. Yeah, and the fairy, the little thing, beats the giant. Okay? So the giant beats the wizard beats the fairy, and the fairy beats the giant. Okay? So in your head, find your partner, stand off, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and I want you to choose what, we'll see how it goes. See if it works. Okay, are you ready? Yeah? 1, 2, 3, go! Oh. Okay, let's try that again. I could see there were some standoffs, 2 fairies, something like that. Okay, let's try again. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go! Cool. You're enjoying it. Let's do it once more. Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go! Okay, you can all sit down now. You can sit down. Okay, so what we do in that game, normally you'd have a line of like 50 people on either side, and you do the whole team does it in one go, and then whoever wins has to catch the other guys before they get to the line. It was a bit difficult to do that here, but that's okay. But you get the idea. But we're all playing wizards, right? We're going back to the kids and learning how to do that magic for ourselves. But it does require this unlearning process to be creative and to let go of all sorts of stuff that we might have become fixated on in terms of how we think about things. So that's really key, so hopefully you've started to do that. The 5th point that I wanted to make in a world where we're all apprentices is that it relates back to these emergencies, but it also requires us to ask really difficult questions. And those are not just what are the right ways of doing things, or even what are the right things, but also what is right. We have to ask those questions. And I would encourage you to really ask that of yourselves. What really is right for us to be doing now at this point when we're at the beginning of the end of the world as we know it, right? That's a really critical question, and that's going to be really important. And I think some of the questions, you can think about things in different ways when you think about knowledge and transformations. I don't think it's about what knowledge do we need for transformation. I don't even think it's about what transformations do we need in knowledge. I think it's more about the latter. What transformations do we need in what we think knowledge is and how we come to know and act? That's going to be critical. And then you get into these kind of questions. Start thinking about what does it mean to be doing things at the end of the world as we know it? What should we be doing at the end of the world as we know it? What is right at the end of the world as we know it? Who should we even be at the end of the world as we know it? And those are really critical kinds of questions. And I noticed there's the session on inner transformations. And that's really, really key if we want to move forward with that. I'm not going to say to you what you should be doing, but I just wanted to highlight what I've realized and decided that I'm going to do. And I've struggled with this over the last couple of years, but I have just embarked really to try and find a really different way of thinking, to really open a different way of knowing. And I thought I needed to do something really radically different to challenge myself with that. So I've committed to quite an intensive 2-year training in shamanistic practice. Don't ask me what that is, I don't know yet. But I've started the process, and it's kind of muddling, but it's complex and confusing. But we've got to start doing these different things and figuring out ways that stimulate our thinking in different ways. The other thing I'm doing is I'm trying to work out how we get some outside stuff happening much more beyond academia. And I'm fortunate to have been working with a colleague who's set up a Twitter feed that's now got 180,000 followers. And we want to create this as a community of serving and getting things that are out there that are different. It's called Doing Things Differently at DTD Change. And we're trying to build that as a community-serving platform to get new stuff out there, new thinking, positivity, and ideas. And if you know of any big sponsors, let me know. So that sort of stuff is out there and starting to work, and I'm looking at how we transition into that sort of space. What does that then mean for this conference? I've talked about what it means for me and maybe what we think about. Well, these are the 5 points that I came up with. I'm sure there are many more. Accept that we're all apprentices. Draw on more diverse forms of knowledge. Develop wisdom as well as knowledge. That's already coming up. Unleash creativity and possibility for magic. Got to figure out how to be wizards in this world and ask the really difficult questions. Those are the things I came up with. I'm sure there are many others. But what I do encourage you to do over the next 3 days, which is a real privilege, right? It's a real privilege for us to be here. Not many people can afford to come to these sorts of things. And to have that time to think and reflect on these sorts of questions and the many other questions that we might have. So I really encourage you to engage with that. But as you do that, please do remember to go out and practice your wizardry skills, because they're going to be really important. I've started the process with that, so I would like to see more wizards out there practicing their wizard skills as we go through the next 3 days. Thank you very much.